morning. Today is too serious a day. Too serious a day and too serious a moment for pettiness. Today is too serious a day and too serious a moment. Much too serious a moment for unserious people. And we first need to know, in moments like this, where everybody stands. Not what you say, but where you stand. So let's make sure certain principles are stood by everyone in this party. First, that Israel has the absolute right and obligation to protect its territorial integrity and to protect the safety and security of every one of its people. Second, that Israel has the right and the obligation to take every military step necessary to eliminate Hamas as a threat tomorrow and every day beyond tomorrow. And third, that Israel continues to focus on the next enemy, who is the enemy today behind Hamas and behind Hezbollah. We must take every step necessary to isolate Iran and make them the pariah in the eyes of the world that we know they are. Those need to be the principles of this war and the principles of American support for Israel, and there cannot be a shed, not even a little, daylight between every credible American leader of both parties and those principles. But our problem is much, much bigger than the war that is going on right now in Israel. It is an American problem, a significant American problem. And it's a problem that has existed now for decades, but that people have been either unwilling to confront or are willingly ignoring. The anti-Semitism we see on American college campuses, for those of you who have been paying attention, and I am one of them, is not new. This did not happen in the last 3 weeks. This did not happen in the last 3 months or the last 3 years. This has been going on for decades. And while it's been going on, people have been willingly standing by and turning a blind eye to it. We know that they hide behind the falsity of free speech. There is a difference, everyone, between free speech and hate speech. There is a difference between free speech and violence. There is a difference between incitement and free speech. And what's going on our college campuses today is not free speech. It is hate speech. What's going on our campuses today is inciting violence, is inciting fear. And we now know the impact it's having on our children. Not one Jewish child on one campus in America should have to worry about practicing their faith openly and aggressively. Not one Jewish child should have to worry about that. Not one Jewish child should have to worry about speaking out in support of Israel on their campus. Not one Jewish child. Not one Jewish child should have to worry about observing Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur openly on their campus. Not one. Not one Jewish child should have to hide in their dorm or their apartment because of fear of their safety or fear of ridicule. And yet, on college campuses all over this country, that is happening today, and it is happening with the acquiescence of university leadership all throughout this country. We have been here before, haven't we? We've been here before. This is not the first time that we've seen people expressing this and saying, as they observe it, it's not our problem. The world knew what was going on in Germany in the 1930s, and they said, it's not our problem. It's not as bad as you say. Yet we know that that disease spread throughout Europe and throughout the world and led to atrocities that none of us can even imagine, was permitted. Yet we know in our hearts and our minds that they were. It was isolationism, everyone. American isolationism that led to those excuses. It was isolationism from other nations around the world that allowed them to turn their backs on what we're seeing on college campuses in America today. So first, we must begin to fix our own problems inside our own borders. Everyone has a different definition of America first. My definition of it in this context is this: America must first fix the problem of anti-Semitism by standing up and saying, absolutely not on our campuses, not in our country, never, never again. And when some folks talk about America first, what they really mean is America alone. They mean fill the moat and pull up the drawbridge. These are not our problems, and we have lived this before. Nobody in this room doesn't want America to be first. All of us do. It's how America becomes first that is the argument inside our party right now. Do we become first by turning our back on the rest of the world? Do we become first by saying, well, this problem, this hate, this murder, this terrorism is not our problem? Don't be fooled, everyone. There are voices in our party, in our own party today, who only want to focus on certain hate, certain violence. That's unacceptable, because what we know is that hate and violence and discrimination anywhere can be spread everywhere if good people don't stand up to fight it. We've seen people masquerading before as American patriots who don't understand what American patriotism really means. We've seen Charles Lindbergh masquerading as an American patriot, having parades for him, and having him and his voice lead our country to a period of moral decay. We can't allow that again. We can't allow people who use the guise of our country needs to look inward, because we can't afford to be looking outward. It's a siren song, everyone. It's one that, if you don't really think about it, can make you feel okay until the events that we've seen in the last few weeks happen. And then we say, why? Why and how? I would argue to you it's because we have been turning our back on this problem for too long in this country, and leaders have made rationalizations which we can't justify any longer. The argument in our party is about whether America is any longer the indispensable nation. What does that mean? We are the indispensable nation, not just to ourselves, but to the world. When moments like this happen, where does the world turn? And if America does not answer the call, who will? The Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians. This is the new foursome of evil. And they are behind the violence that is happening all over the world. They want to do that. And they're challenging us as to whether we're willing to stand up and continue to be what we have always been, the bulwark of freedom and liberty in the world. And so let's be clear about certain other principles that this country needs to stand for. When hate and murder is happening anywhere in the world, America's voice must be strong. When our allies need help, America can't say maybe. America has to say yes. And when we look inside our own country, we can't any longer make excuses. What's happening in college campuses today is reprehensible. Let us not any longer allow our children to be taught in what are supposed to be places of higher learning that there is a moral equivalence between the state of Israel and Hamas. This is a false moral equivalence, and we must say it loudly and clearly every day. The indiscriminate murder of innocent men, women, and children is not an advocacy for a valid position. It is to engender fear in every good person who would otherwise stand up and be counted. The question is, will America walk away in fear, using our own problems internally as justification for that? I say we will not, and we cannot. And so, principle number one is when a friend is the subject of hate and violence in the world, America doesn't ask whether we stand or not. America moves quickly and stands with Israel to fight against this hate. Principle number two is that if we are willing to stand up against hate and violence against our allies around the globe, we must be willing to stand up against hate and violence inside our own country. There are not good people on both sides of this argument. There is only good and bad, right and wrong, good and evil, and we must stand up for the good and the right, regardless of who is saying it on the other side. And you cannot be on both sides of this issue. This is not an issue where you can play both sides to the middle. This is not an issue where you get to compromise. There is no compromise. No compromise on whether America will always stand for freedom, liberty, and what is right. And only the unserious people in our political process here will try to play both sides to the middle. We'll say there are voters on both sides. There are good people on both sides. There are not. So principle number 2 is stand up for what's right every time. Not just when it's convenient, not just when it's comfortable, not just when it's okay according to the media, according to university leadership. It's stand up all the time. And yes, I do believe that faculty who stand up and advocate for hate in our universities need to go. Students who are sent there to learn, but instead are indoctrinated with false moral equivalences. We need to stand up to them as well and tell them that what they're hearing on these university campuses will lead them to a world that will just be ugly, dangerous, and not free. Not free. America is the indispensable nation because we've never been afraid to stand for these things. And we need to make sure that everyone understands that we will not back away or back down. And I hear too much argument in this country that talks about what we're able to do. Under the current circumstances, what can we possibly do? We can't stand against evil around the world because we haven't fixed our southern border. Let me tell you, everybody, we start saying those type of choices are okay, then this country is no longer the indispensable nation. We will be America not first, but America alone. And that's not who we want to be. It's time for us to get back to doing big things in this country. Big things. The problem is that we have been divided by our leadership, our political leadership on both sides of the aisle, into smaller and smaller groups, pitting us against each other on issues that, because of how loudly they say them, they try to make us believe that the loudness of their voice means the bigness of the issue. It's not true. The more we've been divided into smaller and smaller groups and pitted against each other, the smaller we've become. America must stand for the big things. We must be willing to stand up and do things that matter not only for us inside our own country, but for the rest of the folks in the world as well. So it's time for unserious people to leave the stage and for serious people to stand up and say, there is no substitute for American leadership in this world, none at all, and if we allow it to happen, evil will win and good will lose. The loudness of your voice doesn't equal the righteousness of your cause. The righteousness of your cause is determined by the deeds you perform and what you believe in your heart. I'm not up here reading from a speech or a text because I don't need to. Because this is no longer about the specific nuances of any policy. This is about what you believe in your heart. Because whoever will lead our country next, they're not going to be able to anticipate every issue that comes across their desk, and neither will you. But you will know, I hope, whether they are capable in their heart and in their mind to discern between good and evil, between what America has always been and what we need to be going forward. There is no substitute for that. No one asked George W. Bush or Al Gore in 2000, what would you do if 11 hijackers hijacked 4 planes and flew them into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and sent them towards the United States Capitol? But when it happened, we knew that we had a man who in his heart and in his mind knew what America's goodness and strength was. And now for 22 years since, we have not had another foreign terrorist attack on this soil because we had a good man behind the desk in the Oval Office. None of us are ever going to agree with everybody. None of us are ever going to be able to look at any candidate and say they're the perfect candidate. But beware of the candidates who are never wrong. Beware. The candidates who claim they are never wrong are the candidates to be afraid of, because there is no perfect human being, the same way there is no perfect candidate. God has taught us that there is only one perfect being, and he is watching. We as a country need to remember that if we are looking for someone without fault, we will continue to look for the rest of our lives. What we need to look for is someone who has character, who believes in the difference between right and wrong, will not rationalize their bad conduct, but apologize for it, who will never put themselves before this country. When we have people who put themselves before any country, that's when evil has a chance to creep in and violence follows right behind. And let's dispense with the idea that telling the truth is easy. It is not. It is often not easy to have to tell the truth. We all respond to the cheers and the boos of the crowd. We all are affected, whether we want to admit it or not, by how we perceive we are being received. But if we permit that to change the fundamental truth of what's happening in this country, then we are not serving the people we're asking to lead. America is the indispensable nation because we are a nation of laws. We are not a nation of men and women. But those laws only stand, and those principles only stand, if good men and women have the courage to tell the truth. I will never stop telling you the truth. We will always stand together for the truth that stands next to goodness and righteousness, against violence and hate. In the end, the challenge that we face today, the challenge that Israel faces, the challenge that we're facing in Ukraine, the challenge that we are facing in the South China Sea, the challenge that we are facing inside our own borders, need serious, honest people to give not easy answers to complicated problems, but smart answers to complicated problems. In the end, all of you are the ones who are going to decide. I thank God for the fact that you are here. I thank God for the fact that you care. I thank God for the fact that you are fighting. I thank God for the fact that the people in this room represent the best of America, the very, very best of America, that we will stand up against hate and evil and what is wrong and stand up for what is right and what is good. Please don't ever stop doing that, because when you stop doing that, America ceases to be the indispensable nation we must continue to be. Thank you for having me today.